The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's concrete parade ground as Staff Sergeant Mike Harrison watched the newest addition to his explosive ordnance disposal team step out of the transport vehicle. Andrea Jordan moved with what could only be described as deliberate slowness, her every gesture measured and unhurried in a way that immediately set her apart from the rapid-fire energy that defined military life. Harrison had seen thousands of soldiers come through Fort Braxton's gates over his 15-year career, but something about Jordan's unhurried demeanor struck him as odd. In a profession where split-second decisions meant the difference between going home to family or going home in a flag-draped box, her almost leisurely pace seemed not just unusual, but potentially dangerous. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Andrea Jordan appeared to be in her late 20s, with auburn hair pulled back in regulation, style and green eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. Her uniform was crisp, her posture correct, but there was something in the way she moved that suggested she operated on a different timeline than everyone else around her, where other soldiers moved with the sharp, efficient motions of people constantly aware that time was a luxury they couldn't afford. Jordan seemed to exist in a bubble of calm that bordered on the surreal. The EOD training facility at Fort Braxton was known throughout the military as one of the most demanding schools in the armed forces. Here, soldiers learned to disarm improvised explosive devices, handle chemical weapons, and deal with ordnance that could level city blocks if mishandled. The washout rate was brutal. Nearly 60% of candidates failed to complete the program. Those who remained were among the military's elite, specialists whose skills were measured not in marksmanship or physical fitness, but in their ability to remain calm under pressure that would break most people. As Jordan approached the main training building, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder with the same unhurried precision that characterized her every movement, Harrison found himself wondering what had possessed the personnel department to assign someone who seemed so fundamentally unsuited to the rapid response nature of explosive ordnance disposal. In EOD work, hesitation wasn't just discouraged, it was potentially fatal. The morning briefing was scheduled for 0800 hours sharp, and Harrison prided himself on running a tight operation. His team of 12 specialists had trained together for months, developing the kind of seamless coordination that came from absolute trust in each other's abilities. They were scheduled to begin advanced IED simulation training that week, working with devices that replicated the sophisticated bombs being encountered in current conflict zones. It was dangerous work that required not just technical knowledge, but lightning-fast reflexes and the ability to think clearly under extreme pressure. Jordan entered the briefing room at exactly 0800, not a minute early or late, and took a seat in the back row. Harrison noticed that while other team members were already engaged in the pre-briefing chatter that helped ease pre-training nerves, Jordan sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, observing everything with the same measured attention she seemed to apply to every aspect of her existence. Specialist Ryan Coleman, a 23-year-old from Texas who joined EOD after 3 tours as an infantry soldier, leaned over to his buddy Marcus Webb and whispered just loud enough for Jordan to hear. Think she's gonna be able to keep up? Looks like she moves in slow motion. Webb, a former Marine who'd transferred to Army EOD after a roadside bomb had ended his infantry career, chuckled quietly. Maybe she's practicing meditation techniques. Gonna need all the zen she can get when she's staring down a live device with a timer counting down. Jordan's expression didn't change, but Harrison caught her eyes flicking briefly toward the 2 men before returning to their neutral forward focus. There was something in that glance, not annoyance or embarrassment, but a kind of patient assessment that suggested she was filing away information for future reference. The briefing covered the week's training schedule, safety protocols, and the technical specifications of the devices they'd be working with. Harrison emphasized the importance of speed and precision, noting that in real-world scenarios, EID specialists often had only minutes or seconds to identify, analyze, and neutralize threats that could kill dozens of people. As he spoke, he found his eyes repeatedly drawn to Jordan, who took notes in the same methodical handwriting that seemed to characterize everything she did. After the briefing, the team moved to the equipment room where each specialist was assigned their protective gear and tools. The bomb suits alone weighed nearly 80 pounds, and watching soldiers struggle into them was always a reminder of the physical demands of the job. Jordan approached her assigned gear with the same unhurried precision she'd displayed all morning, methodically checking each component while other team members were already suiting up. "Jordan," Harrison called out, his voice carrying a note of impatience. "We're on a schedule here. In the field, you won't have all day to get your gear sorted." "Yes, Sergeant," Jordan replied simply, continuing her systematic inspection without any apparent increase in speed. Harrison noticed that despite her deliberate pace, she was actually identifying and correcting equipment issues that the faster-moving soldiers were missing. A loose connection here, a worn strap there, details that could become critical in high-stress situations. Specialist Sarah Martinez, one of only 3 women in the EOD unit, watched Jordan's methodical approach with interest rather than impatience. Martinez had earned her position through exceptional technical skills and an ability to remain calm under pressure that had impressed even the most skeptical of her male colleagues. Something about Jordan's measured approach reminded her of the way master bomb technicians worked: deliberate, thorough, missing nothing. The training area was set up to replicate an urban environment, complete with mock buildings, abandoned vehicles, and hidden explosive devices designed to test every aspect of an EOD specialist's skills. The morning's exercise involved locating and disarming 3 different IEDs within a specified time limit, working in teams of 2 to simulate real-world conditions where specialists never worked alone. Jordan was paired with Coleman, whose earlier comments about her speed had established him as skeptical of her abilities. As they approached their assigned sector, Coleman's body language made it clear he expected to be carrying the load for both of them. The first device was hidden in an abandoned vehicle, designed to look like the kind of car bomb that had become tragically common in conflict zones around the world. "Standard procedure," Coleman explained, though Jordan hadn't asked for instruction. "We approach carefully, identify the device, assess the triggering mechanism, and neutralize it step by step. Speed is crucial because in a real scenario, we might have civilians in the blast radius and limited time before enemy forces arrive." Jordan nodded, then began her approach to the vehicle with the same measured pace that had characterized her every action since arriving at Fort Braxton. Coleman, watching her deliberate movement, felt his impatience growing. In training scenarios, speed translated directly to scores, and scores determined who advanced in the program and who found themselves reassigned to less critical positions. But as Jordan began her examination of the device, something unexpected happened. Her movements, while still deliberate, revealed a level of technical knowledge that far exceeded what Coleman had expected. She identified the device type immediately, traced the wiring with confident precision, and began the disarming sequence, with movements that were slow but absolutely certain. "How did you know it was a pressure plate trigger?" Coleman asked, genuinely curious now rather than impatient. "The wiring pattern," Jordan replied simply, her attention focused entirely on the device. "The way the contacts are positioned indicates a pressure-sensitive mechanism rather than a timer or remote detonator." Coleman realized that Jordan's slowness was actually meticulous thoroughness. While he'd been focused on moving quickly, she'd been absorbing and processing information at a level that allowed her to make accurate, technical assessments without the trial-and-error approach that characterized many EOD specialists' work. the device was successfully disarmed with time to spare, despite Jordan's unhurried approach. As they moved to the second location, Coleman found himself watching her technique more carefully, beginning to recognize that her measured pace masked a level of expertise that was becoming harder to dismiss as mere luck. The second device proved more challenging, a sophisticated IED, designed to mimic the kind of multi-stage bombs that had claimed the lives of numerous EOD specialists in recent conflicts. These devices were designed with anti-tampering mechanisms that could detonate the bomb if disarmed incorrectly, requiring not just technical knowledge, but the kind of calm precision that came from extensive experience. Jordan approached this device with the same deliberate methodology, but Coleman now recognized that her slowness was actually a form of speed, the speed that came from doing things correctly the first time rather than having to backtrack and correct mistakes. Her fingers moved across the device's components with a confidence that suggested familiarity born of extensive practice. "Jordan," Coleman said quietly as she worked, "where exactly did you train before coming here?" She paused in her work, glancing at him with those green eyes that seemed to hold depths he was only beginning to recognize. "Various places," she said simply, then returned to the device. The non-answer was delivered with the same measured calm that characterized everything about Andrea Jordan. But Coleman was beginning to sense that there was far more to his new partner than her deliberately slow reflexes suggested. As she successfully disarmed the second device with movements that were beginning to look less like slowness and more like perfect precision, he found himself wondering what kind of various places produced EOD specialists who could work with such confident, methodical expertise. The morning training session ended with Jordan and Coleman having successfully completed all three scenarios within the time limit, despite or perhaps because of Jordan's unhurried approach. As they returned to the equipment room to clean and store their gear, Coleman noticed that other team members were beginning to take notice of the new specialist, who moved like she had all the time in the world but somehow accomplished everything that needed to be done. Staff Sergeant Harrison reviewed the morning's performance scores with growing curiosity. Jordan's team had not only completed all objectives, but had done so with a level of technical precision that exceeded the performance of specialists with months more training. Her approach was unconventional, but the results spoke for themselves. As the team prepared for lunch, Coleman found himself walking alongside Jordan, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity about the woman who seemed to operate according to rules that no one else quite understood. "Jordan," he said as they approached the mess hall, "I've got to ask, what's your background? You handle those devices like you've been doing this for years." Andrea Jordan paused in the doorway, turning to face Coleman with the same measured attention she applied to everything else. For a moment, he thought she might actually provide a real answer, but then she smiled, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her all day. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the best way to move fast is to never hurry." The response was typically cryptic, but as Coleman watched her enter the mess hall with that same deliberate pace that had initially seemed like a liability, he began to suspect that Andrea Jordan's slow reflexes might be hiding something far more significant than anyone had imagined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mess hall at Fort Braxton buzzed with the typical post-training energy as EOD specialists dissected the morning's exercises over regulation meatloaf and coffee that could strip paint. Andrea Jordan sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her lunch while the conversations of her new teammates flowed around her like water around a stone. At a table near the center of the room, Ryan Coleman was holding court with his usual audience of fellow specialists. His voice carried just enough to reach Jordan's ears, though whether this was intentional remained unclear. "I'm telling you, watching her work is like watching paint dry," Coleman said, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. "We had a simple pressure plate device, and she spent 5 full minutes just looking at it, before she even touched a wire. 5 minutes. In a real scenario, half the neighborhood could have been evacuated in that time. Marcus Webb nodded along, though his expression suggested he was paying more attention to his food than Coleman's commentary. Maybe she's just thorough, he offered without much conviction. Thorough? Coleman laughed, the sound harsh in the institutional acoustics of the mess hall. There's thorough, and then there's whatever Jordan's doing. I watched her check the same connection 3 times before she was satisfied it was stable. 3 times. Like she didn't trust her own eyes. Specialist Tony Reeves, a veteran of 2 deployments who'd earned his EOD certification after losing 2 friends to an IED in Kandahar, looked up from his meal with interest. You know what gets people killed out there, Coleman? Rushing. Assuming you know what you're looking at before you actually know what you're looking at. Come on, Reeves, Coleman shot back. We're not talking about being careful. We're talking about someone who moves like she's underwater. You see her suiting up this morning? Took her 20 minutes to do what the rest of us managed in 10. What Coleman didn't mention, because he either hadn't noticed or chose to ignore, was that Jordan's 20-minute gear check had identified and corrected 4 separate equipment issues that could have compromised safety during training. A loose shoulder strap that could have shifted under pressure, a helmet communication system with intermittent connection, a boot that wasn't properly secured, and a tool holster that had been mounted incorrectly, Sarah Martinez, who had observed Jordan's meticulous gear preparation, kept her thoughts to herself. In her 3 years with the unit, she'd learned that competence often looked different than people expected, and she'd seen too many specialists wash out because they prioritized speed over precision. Maybe she's just nervous, suggested Jake Morrison, a soft-spoken specialist from Oregon who rarely contributed to Coleman's discussions. First day with a new unit, working with unfamiliar equipment. Some people need time to adjust. Coleman's laugh was dismissive. Nervous? Morrison, she looked about as nervous as a statue. If anything, she seemed bored. Like the whole exercise was beneath her attention. This observation was closer to the truth than Coleman realized, though he interpreted Jordan's calm demeanor as disinterest rather than recognition. Someone watching carefully might have noticed that Jordan's measured responses suggested familiarity rather than uncertainty, as if she was working with equipment and procedures she'd encountered many times before. The afternoon training schedule called for individual timed exercises, designed to test each specialist's ability to work under pressure without the benefit of a partner's support. The scenario involved a mock apartment building where multiple devices had been planted, each requiring different disarmament techniques. Specialists would work alone, with their performance monitored by instructors and recorded for later analysis. Staff Sergeant Harrison gathered the team in the briefing room, where a detailed schematic of the training building was displayed on a large monitor. Each device represents a different type of threat you might encounter in urban environments, he explained, using a laser pointer to highlight specific locations. Device 1 is a timer-activated bomb hidden in a kitchen appliance. Device 2 is a pressure-sensitive mechanism attached to a doorframe. Device 3 is a motion-activated device designed to detonate if disturbed incorrectly. The exercise parameters were strict. Each specialist had 45 minutes to locate and disarm all 3 devices. Failure to complete the exercise within the time limit resulted in a failing grade for the day's training. More importantly, incorrect handling of any device would trigger simulation alarms that indicated casualties among theoretical civilians in the building. The scoring system takes into account both speed and accuracy, Harrison continued. A fast disarmament that leaves civilians dead is considered a failure, regardless of time. A slow disarmament that allows theoretical enemies to arrive and complicate the scenario is also considered a failure. You need to find the balance between careful work and efficient execution. Coleman raised his hand. Sergeant, what's the average completion time for this exercise? Experienced specialists. Typically completed in 30 to 35 minutes, Harrison replied. Trainees average closer to 40 minutes, assuming they complete it successfully at all. As the team prepared for their individual exercises, the competitive atmosphere became evident. EA's specialists were used to working under pressure, but the individual nature of this test meant that each person's performance would be directly compared to their teammates. For Coleman and several others, this represented an opportunity to demonstrate their superiority over the new team member, who seemed so fundamentally unsuited to the rapid pace of explosive ordnance disposal. Jordan was assigned to go fifth in the rotation, giving her the opportunity to observe several other specialists' approaches before her turn. She watched each performance with the same measured attention she applied to everything else, taking notes in a small notebook that seemed to contain far more detailed observations than most people would consider necessary for a training exercise. Coleman went second, attacking the exercise with the aggressive efficiency that characterized his approach to most challenges. He located the first device quickly, identified it correctly, and began disarmament procedures with confident, rapid movements. His technique was solid, his speed impressive, and he completed the first device in under 8 minutes. The second device proved more challenging. Coleman's rapid approach led him to miss a secondary trigger mechanism that was designed to catch specialists who rushed through their initial assessment. When he attempted to cut what appeared to be the primary power wire, the simulation alarm indicated that he had triggered a backup detonator, theoretically killing himself and several civilians. "Coleman, you're dead," Harrison announced over the intercom. "Take time to analyze what went wrong, then continue with the exercise for training purposes." Coleman's frustration was evident as he backtracked to identify the mechanism he'd missed. The secondary trigger was subtle, a contact switch designed to activate if the primary system was disrupted, before being properly neutralized. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated anti-tampering device that had made modern IEDs so deadly for military specialists. By the time Coleman completed the exercise, he had used 38 minutes and accumulated 1 theoretical fatality. A respectable performance for most trainees, but not the dominant showing he'd hoped for. When Jordan's turn arrived, the team gathered in the observation room to watch her performance on the closed-circuit monitors. There was an air of expectation, though opinions were split on what they expected to see. Coleman and his supporters anticipated a slow, methodical approach that would run out of time before completion. Martinez and a few others wondered if Jordan's deliberate pace might actually prove advantageous in the careful work required for successful disarmament. Jordan entered the mock apartment, building with the same unhurried pace that had characterized her every action since arriving at Fort Braxton. She spent nearly 2 minutes in the entrance hallway, apparently studying the layout and examining details that weren't immediately obvious to the observers. "She's already behind schedule," Coleman muttered to Webb. 2 minutes and she hasn't even started looking for devices. What the observers couldn't see was that Jordan's initial survey was identifying structural details, electrical patterns, and spatial relationships that would inform her approach to each device. Where other specialists treated each bomb as an isolated challenge, Jordan was analyzing the apartment as an integrated system, looking for connections and patterns that might indicate how the devices were intended to work together. When she finally approached the first device, hidden inside a coffee maker in the kitchen, her initial examination was indeed slow by normal standards. She spent nearly 5 minutes studying the mechanism from every angle, tracing wiring patterns, and testing connections with equipment that allowed her to analyze the device without triggering it. "This is painful to watch," Coleman said, shaking his head. "She's going to run out of time before she finishes the first device." But when Jordan finally began the disarmament sequence, her movements were precise and confident in a way that suggested absolute certainty about each step. She didn't hesitate, didn't double-check connections, didn't pause to reconsider her approach. Each action flowed seamlessly into the next, and the device was neutralized in under 3 minutes of actual hands-on work. The total time for the first device was 8 minutes, exactly average for the exercise. Jordan had spent most of that time in analysis, but once she began working, her execution was flawless. The second device, located in the doorframe between the living room and bedroom, presented the pressure-sensitive challenge that had caught Coleman off guard. Jordan's approach was again characterized by extensive initial analysis, this time taking nearly 6 minutes to study the mechanism and its relationship to the building's structure. Harrison found himself leaning forward in his chair, watching Jordan work with growing interest. Her analysis pattern was unlike anything he'd seen from trainees, suggesting a level of systematic thinking that typically took years to develop. She wasn't just looking at the device itself. She was considering how it fit into the larger tactical picture, how it might be connected to other threats, what its placement revealed about the mindset of whoever had designed the scenario. When Jordan began disarming the pressure-sensitive device, her technique revealed knowledge of anti-tampering mechanisms that hadn't been covered in the standard curriculum. She identified and neutralized the secondary trigger that had caught Coleman, then proceeded to disarm the primary mechanism with movements that suggested she'd encountered similar devices before. The third device, motion activated and designed to be the most challenging of the exercise, was located in the bedroom closet. Jordan's approach to this final challenge confirmed what Harrison was beginning to suspect. This was not her first encounter with sophisticated explosive devices. Her analysis of the motion-sensitive mechanism was swift and confident, suggesting recognition rather than discovery. When she began the disarmament sequence, her movements were precise in a way that spoke of extensive experience with similar systems. The device was neutralized efficiently, without triggering any of the backup systems designed to catch specialists who approached the mechanism incorrectly. Jordan completed the entire exercise in 34 minutes, well within the time limit and with 0 theoretical casualties. More significantly, her approach demonstrated a level of technical sophistication that exceeded what anyone had expected from a new team member. As Jordan exited the mock apartment building, the observation room was unusually quiet. Coleman's confident predictions about her failure had proven dramatically incorrect, and several team members were beginning to reconsider their initial assessments of the woman who moved like she had all the time in the world. "Beginner's luck," Coleman said finally, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Martinez looked at him with barely concealed amusement. 34 minutes with perfect technique isn't luck, Coleman. That's competence." The discussion that followed revealed the growing divide in the team's assessment of Andrea Jordan. Some, led by Coleman, insisted that her slow approach was fundamentally incompatible with the rapid response requirements of real-world EOD work. Others, particularly those with more extensive field experience, recognized that her methodical technique suggested training and experience that exceeded what her personnel file indicated. Staff Sergeant Harrison reviewed the recorded footage of Jordan's performance with growing curiosity. Her technique wasn't just competent, it was sophisticated in ways that suggested familiarity with advanced threat assessment procedures that weren't typically taught at the basic level. The way she analyzed spatial relationships, identified anti-tampering mechanisms, and executed disarmament sequences spoke of extensive experience with real-world explosive devices. As the team prepared for evening chow, the conversations continued to center on the new specialist who defied easy categorization. Some saw her deliberate pace as a fundamental weakness that would prove dangerous in high-pressure situations. Others began to wonder if Andrea Jordan's slow reflexes might be hiding expertise that none of them had yet fully recognized. The question that no one was asking, but that Harrison was beginning to consider, was where exactly someone acquired the kind of advanced EOD skills that Jordan had demonstrated, and why someone with that level of expertise would be assigned to a basic Training Unit at Fort Braxton. The third week of training brought a new level of complexity to the EOD program at Fort Braxton. The morning briefing revealed that the team would be working with live ordnance for the first time, not the massive explosives that could level buildings, but real grenades, actual blasting caps, and functioning detonators that demanded respect and absolute precision. Staff Sergeant Harrison stood before the assembled specialists in the secure briefing room, his expression more serious than usual. Behind him, a projection displayed images of various explosive devices that would be used in the day's exercises. The transition from simulation to live ordnance marked a crucial milestone in EOD, training the point where mistakes carried consequences beyond poor grades. "Today we work with live explosives," Harrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years' experience with devices that didn't forgive carelessness. "Every piece of ordnance in the training area is real, functional, and potentially lethal if mishandled. The safety protocols we've drilled for the past 3 weeks aren't suggestions anymore. They're the difference between going home tonight and not going home at all." Andrea Jordan sat in her usual position in the back row, taking notes with the same methodical precision that had characterized her approach to every aspect of training. To her left, Specialist Derek Foster shifted nervously in his seat. Foster had joined the EOD program after 2 tours as a combat medic, where he'd seen the aftermath of improvised explosive devices often enough to develop a healthy respect for anything that could explode. "The exercise parameters are different. Today," Harrison continued, "you'll be working in teams of 3, with 1 team member designated as the primary specialist, 1 as backup, and 1 as safety observer. The devices you'll encounter include M67 fragmentation grenades, with disabled but intact firing mechanisms, M112 demolition charges, and various blasting caps arranged in scenarios designed to replicate real-world conditions." Ryan Coleman raised his hand, his confidence apparently unshaken by the transition to live ordnance. "Sergeant, what are the time constraints for today's exercises?" Harrison's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well caught the slight narrowing of his eyes that indicated displeasure. "Coleman, when you're working with live explosives, time constraints are determined by the device, not by training schedules. A rushed mistake with simulation equipment costs points. A rushed mistake with live ordnance costs lives." The message was clear, but Coleman's follow-up question suggested the lesson hadn't penetrated as deeply as Harrison might have hoped. "But surely there are still target completion times for evaluation purposes?" "The target completion time," Harrison said with deliberate emphasis, "is successfully neutralizing the threat without casualties. Everything else is secondary." The teams were assigned randomly, a deliberate choice designed to prevent specialists from becoming too comfortable working with familiar partners. Real-world EOD operations often required working with unfamiliar personnel, and the ability to adapt quickly to different working styles could be the difference between mission success and disaster. Jordan found herself assigned to Team Alpha, working alongside Foster and Specialist Lisa Chun, a former Air Force technician who'd transferred to Army ED after distinguishing herself in electronics and communications training. Chun was known for her technical expertise and calm demeanor under pressure, while Foster brought medical knowledge that proved valuable when assessing potential casualty scenarios. Team Alpha's first assignment involved a simulated car bomb scenario. Using an actual M112 demolition charge wired to a complex trigger mechanism, the device was located in a mock parking garage surrounded by mannequins, representing civilian casualties and positioned to test the team's ability to work under realistic spatial constraints. Chun served as primary specialist, with Jordan designated as backup and Foster as safety observer. The standard protocol called for the primary specialist to conduct initial assessment while the backup maintained equipment and monitored for secondary threats. The safety observer's role was to watch for environmental hazards and ensure all personnel remained within safe operating parameters. Chun approached the vehicle with textbook precision. Her assessment systematic and thorough. She identified the device quickly, traced the primary wiring, and began mapping the trigger mechanism with confident efficiency. Her technique was solid, her analysis accurate, and her progress steady, exactly what Harrison expected from a specialist with her training and experience. But as Chun worked, Jordan began to notice details that hadn't been included in the initial briefing. The positioning of the mannequins wasn't random, it suggested specific blast patterns that indicated this device was more sophisticated than a simple car bomb. The wiring configuration included redundancies that weren't immediately obvious, and the placement of the demolition charge suggested the possibility of secondary devices designed to target responding personnel. "Chun," Jordan said quietly, her voice carrying none of the urgency that might have indicated immediate danger. "Check the undercarriage near the rear axle." Chun paused in her primary assessment to look where Jordan indicated. "I don't see anything obvious. Why?" Jordan's response was characteristically measured. The blast pattern suggested by the primary device placement would direct most of the explosive force upward and outward. If this were designed to target both initial casualties and first responders, you'd want a secondary device positioned to detonate during evacuation procedures. Foster looked between the two women with growing concern. "Are we talking about a secondary device that's not part of the exercise parameters?" "The exercise parameters call for realistic scenario replication," Jordan replied simply. "Real world car bombs often include anti-tampering devices designed to target EOD personnel." Chun's examination of the area Jordan had indicated revealed a small secondary charge wired to a motion detector, a device that would have activated if the vehicle had been moved or tilted during evacuation procedures. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated anti-personnel addition that made modern IEDs so deadly for military specialists. "How did you spot that?" Chun asked, genuine admiration in her voice. "I've been over this vehicle twice and didn't notice anything unusual about the undercarriage positioning." Jordan's answer was typically cryptic. Sometimes the most important things are the ones that look perfectly normal. The discovery of the secondary device changed the entire approach to the exercise. What had appeared to be a straightforward car bomb disarmament became a complex multi-stage operation requiring coordination between all three team members. Chun continued working on the primary device while Jordan took responsibility for neutralizing the secondary charge, and Foster monitored both operations while maintaining communication with the control station. Staff Sergeant Harrison, observing from the command post, found himself studying Jordan's technique with growing interest. Her approach to the secondary device demonstrated familiarity with anti-tampering mechanisms that went beyond standard EOD training. More significantly, her initial identification of the hidden threat suggested analytical skills that typically took years of field experience to develop. The two devices were successfully neutralized within 38 minutes, well within acceptable parameters for the exercise. But the significance of the exercise extended beyond successful completion. Jordan's identification of the secondary threat had prevented what would have been a catastrophic failure in a real-world scenario. Word of Team Alpha's performance spread quickly through the EOD unit. By the time the teams gathered for afternoon briefing, Jordan's identification of the hidden secondary device had become the subject of intense discussion among the specialists. How the hell did she spot something that was specifically designed not to be spotted? Coleman asked, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine puzzlement. "I've been doing this for 18 months, and I would never have thought to check for secondary devices during a basic car bomb exercise." Marcus Webb, who'd been increasingly quiet during recent discussions about Jordan, offered a different perspective. "Maybe she's just naturally paranoid. Some people see threats everywhere. They look Specialist Tony Reeves, whose combat experience gave his opinions particular weight among the trainees, disagreed. That wasn't paranoia, that was pattern recognition. She looked at the device placement and blast vectors and realized something. Didn't fit standard car bomb parameters. That's advanced tactical thinking. Sarah Martinez, who'd been watching Jordan's performance with professional interest since her arrival, posed the question that several specialists were beginning to consider. Where exactly does someone learn to think like that? Advanced tactical. Threat assessment isn't covered in basic EOD training. The question hung in the air without an answer, but it crystallized the growing sense among team members that Andrea Jordan's background included elements that weren't reflected in her official personnel file. The afternoon exercise involved controlled detonation procedures, the delicate process of destroying discovered ordnance that couldn't be safely disarmed. The exercise used actual blasting caps and small charges to teach specialists how to calculate safe distances, prepare shaped charges for controlled destruction, and manage the complex logistics of explosive disposal in populated areas. Jordan was assigned to Team Bravo for the afternoon session, working with Coleman and Jake Morrison in a scenario that required destroying a cache of simulated enemy ordnance discovered in a residential building. The exercise parameters specified that the building couldn't be evacuated completely due to hostile activity in the surrounding area, requiring the team to calculate precise charge placement that would destroy the threat without causing structural damage that might harm remaining civilians. Coleman served as primary specialist, with Jordan as backup and Morrison as safety observer. The setup required calculating explosive yields, structural load tolerances, and precise timing to ensure the controlled detonation achieved complete destruction of the target ordnance without compromising building integrity. Coleman's approach was aggressive and confident, reflecting his belief that decisive action was preferable to extended analysis. He calculated charge placement quickly, positioned the demolition materials with efficient precision, and prepared the timing mechanisms according to standard procedures. But as Coleman worked, Jordan began studying the building's structural blueprints with unusual intensity. Her analysis went beyond the immediate requirements of the exercise, examining load-bearing walls, utility routing, and architectural details that seemed peripheral to the demolition requirements. "Coleman," Jordan said quietly, "the charges are positioned correctly for destroying the target ordnance, but the blast will compromise the building's water main." Coleman paused in his timer settings to look at Jordan with exasperation. "Jordan, we're trying to destroy explosives, not preserve plumbing. The water main isn't part of the exercise parameters." "In a real scenario," Jordan replied with her characteristic calm, "a compromised water main in a residential building with trapped civilians becomes a secondary emergency that diverts resources from the primary mission." Morrison looked up from his safety checklist with interest. "She's got a point, Coleman. If we flood the basement while people are still in the building, we've created a rescue situation that wasn't necessary." Jordan's suggested modification involved repositioning two of the charges and adjusting the blast sequence to direct the explosive force away from the building's infrastructure, while maintaining complete destruction of the target ordnance. The changes were subtle, requiring only minor adjustments to Coleman's original plan, but they demonstrated a level of systems thinking that went beyond standard demolition procedures. The controlled detonation was executed flawlessly, destroying the target ordnance completely while leaving the building's structure and utilities intact. Post-exercise analysis confirmed that Jordan's modifications had prevented what would have been significant collateral damage in a real-world scenario. As Team Bravo completed their equipment cleanup, Coleman found himself studying Jordan with a mixture of respect and confusion that was becoming familiar among her teammates. "Jordan," he said finally, "I've got to ask, where did you learn to think about secondary and tertiary effects like that? That kind of comprehensive scenario analysis isn't something they teach in basic EOD school." Jordan's response was delivered with the same measured calm that characterized all her interactions. Sometimes the most important part of solving a problem is understanding all the ways the solution can create new problems. The non-answer was typical of Jordan's communication style, but Coleman was beginning to recognize that her seemingly simple statements often contained depths of meaning that weren't immediately apparent. As the teams gathered for final debriefing, the conversations increasingly centered on the new specialist, whose slow reflexes seemed to mask analytical capabilities that exceeded anything in the standard training curriculum. Staff Sergeant Harrison's evaluation of the day's exercises included specific mention of Jordan's performance in both scenarios, her identification of the hidden secondary device, and her structural analysis during the controlled demolition demonstrated competencies that suggested training and experience beyond what her personnel file indicated. That evening, as specialists discussed the day's events over dinner, the conversations revealed a growing shift in attitudes toward Andrea Jordan. Her deliberate pace was beginning to be seen not as a liability, but as evidence of thoroughness that consistently produced superior results. "I'm starting to think," Sarah Martinez said quietly to Tony Reeves as they reviewed their notes from the day's exercises, that Jordan's not learning this stuff, she's remembering it. The observation captured something that several team members were beginning to sense about their enigmatic teammate. Andrea Jordan's slow reflexes were starting to look less like inexperience and more like the careful deliberation of someone who had encountered these challenges before, in circumstances that might have been considerably more dangerous than training exercises at Fort Braxton. The Fort Braxton Base Library, at 2,100 hours, was supposed to be nearly empty, with only a few dedicated students cramming for promotion exams or technical certifications. Ryan Coleman had counted on this when he settled into a corner workstation with his laptop and a stack of military personnel databases he probably shouldn't have had access to. His security clearance as an EOD specialist granted him broader computer privileges than most soldiers, and tonight he intended to use every bit of that access to solve the mystery of Andrea Jordan. 3 weeks of training alongside Jordan had transformed Coleman's initial dismissal into obsessive curiosity. Her performance during live ordnance exercises had been flawless in ways that defied explanation. More troubling, her analytical approach suggested familiarity with threat patterns and explosive devices that went far beyond anything covered in covert, standard EOD training. Coleman's first searches yielded exactly what he'd expected, a personnel file so sparse it raised more questions than it answered. Andrea Jordan, age 28, enlisted 18 months ago after completing community college courses in electronics and mechanical engineering. Previous employment listed as various technical positions, with a civilian contractor whose name meant nothing to Coleman. No prior military service, no specialized training certifications, no explanation for how someone with such a mundane background could demonstrate expertise that impressed even veteran instructors. The problem wasn't what was in Jordan's file, it was what wasn't there. No high school yearbook photos searchable online, no social media presence, no digital footprint that would be normal for someone her age. Her credit history began exactly 18 months ago, coinciding with her military enlistment. Her driver's license had been issued in the same time frame, despite the fact that she was clearly an experienced driver. Coleman expanded his search parameters, looking for any Jordan who matched her physical description and approximate age. The results were frustratingly generic: dozens of Andrea Jordans scattered across the country, none of whom seemed to match the woman he trained with daily. At a workstation across the library, Specialist Derek Foster was conducting his own investigation, though his approach focused on technical databases rather than personnel records. Foster's medical background had given him access to injury and treatment databases, and something about Jordan's behavior during explosive handling had triggered his professional curiosity. Jordan never flinched during controlled detonations. Even veteran EAD specialists showed involuntary stress responses to explosive sounds, increased heart rate, momentary startle reflexes, heightened alertness. These were normal physiological reactions to potentially dangerous stimuli. Jordan displayed none of them. During the previous day's training, when an unexpected detonation had sent several specialists diving for cover, Jordan had remained perfectly calm, continuing her equipment check as if nothing had happened. Foster's search focused on military medical records, looking for treatment of traumatic stress disorders, hearing damage, or neurological conditions that might explain Jordan's unusual responses to explosive environments. What he found instead were gaps medical records that began 18 months ago with a comprehensive physical examination that noted several old injuries of undetermined origin. The medical file contained references to previous treatment records, unavailable due to classification restrictions, language that suggested Jordan's medical history was sealed under security protocols that exceeded Foster's clearance level. Meanwhile, Sarah Martinez was taking a different approach entirely. Her investigation focused on technical databases and training records, searching for evidence of advanced EOD instruction that might explain Jordan's capabilities. Martinez had noticed that Jordan's techniques included procedures and safety protocols that weren't taught in standard Army EOD schools. Her search through inter-service training databases revealed something interesting. Several of Jordan's techniques matched protocols used by specialized units that handled particularly sophisticated explosive devices. These units operated under classification levels that made information difficult to access. But Martinez's persistence uncovered references to advanced threat assessment training and unconventional ordnance disposal certification. The problem was that none of these specialized programs showed any record of training someone named Andrea Jordan. At his workstation, Coleman was expanding his search to include military contractor databases, following the vague reference in Jordan's personnel file to previous civilian employment. The contractor name Blackstone Technical Solutions appeared to be legitimate, but information about their operations was surprisingly limited. Their corporate website listed services including technical support for government agencies and specialized training solutions, but provided no details about specific contracts or personnel. Coleman's search for former Blackstone employees yielded almost nothing. A handful of LinkedIn profiles for administrative staff, a few mentions in government contract awards, but no trace of technical personnel who might have worked alongside Jordan. The more Coleman searched, the more convinced he became that Andrea Jordan's official background was carefully constructed fiction. Every element of her history seemed designed to provide just enough detail to satisfy casual inquiry while concealing any information that might reveal her true qualifications or experience. Foster made the first significant breakthrough shortly after midnight. His search through classified medical databases, a borderline violation of his access privileges, revealed a cross-reference that shouldn't have existed. A medical record number associated with Jordan's file appeared in a different database entirely, one that tracked treatment for personnel injured during special operations activities. The medical details were heavily redacted, but the dates were revealing. The record indicated treatment for injuries sustained during classified operations, approximately 3 years ago, well before Jordan's official enlistment date. More significantly, the injury patterns described blast-related trauma and chemical exposure consistent with EOD work in combat environments. Foster stared at his screen, trying to process the implications. If the medical records were accurate, Jordan had been injured during explosive ordnance work years before she officially joined the military. But how was that possible, and why? Would someone with that experience be assigned to basic training? Martinez's technical investigation yielded the second breakthrough. Her search through specialized training databases revealed a fascinating pattern. Several techniques Jordan had demonstrated during exercises matched procedures developed by units that handled chemical weapons disposal and nuclear ordnance. These weren't skills taught in conventional EOD training. They required specialized instruction available only to personnel with the highest security clearances. The techniques were subtle specific safety protocols, analytical procedures, equipment, handling methods that would be invisible to casual observers, but obvious to someone trained in the same specialized methods. Martinez realized that Jordan hadn't just received advanced EOD training. She'd been trained in the most classified aspects of explosive ordnance disposal. Coleman's investigation took a different turn when he decided to search for military personnel who had died or been declared missing in action during the time frame when Jordan's mysterious previous experience might have occurred. The search parameters were broad female personnel, approximate age match, EOD or related specialties, but the results were limited by classification restrictions. One result caught his attention: Staff Sergeant Angela Morrison, listed as killed in action during classified operations in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The casualty report was heavily redacted, but the available information described an EOD specialist who had died during advanced ordnance disposal operations. No body had been recovered due to hostile action and operational security considerations. The photograph attached to Morrison's service record showed a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Andrea Jordan, though differences in hair color and facial structure made definitive identification difficult. More intriguingly, Morrison's technical qualifications included exactly the kind of specialized training that would explain Jordan's advanced capabilities. Coleman stared at the photograph, trying to process what he was seeing. Was it possible that Andrea Jordan was actually Angela Morrison, somehow survived and given a new identity? The idea seemed impossible, but it would explain everything: her advanced skills, her sparse background, her unusual calm under pressure. Foster's continued search through medical databases revealed additional pieces of the puzzle. The injury patterns associated with Jordan's mysterious medical record included specific types of trauma that were almost exclusively associated with close proximity explosive devices. The treatment protocols mentioned experimental procedures, typically reserved for personnel injured during highly classified operations. Most significantly, the medical timeline indicated that whoever had sustained these injuries had been unconscious for an extended period and required extensive reconstructive treatment. The kind of treatment that might have provided an opportunity to alter someone's appearance enough to support a new identity. Martinez discovered the final piece of the technical puzzle when she found references to a classified program called Phoenix Protocol in archived training databases. The program appeared to involve retraining experienced personnel for new roles, with specific emphasis on maintaining operational security and protecting classified capabilities. The Phoenix Protocol documentation was heavily redacted, but the available information suggested it was designed for personnel who needed to transition to new operational parameters while maintaining essential capabilities. The language was bureaucratic, but the implications were clear. This was a program for giving experienced operators new identities while preserving their specialized skills. By 03:00 hours, the three investigators had assembled a picture that was both compelling and deeply troubling. All evidence pointed to the conclusion that Andrea Jordan was not who she appeared to be. Her advanced capabilities, mysterious medical history, and carefully constructed background suggested someone with extensive combat experience in the most dangerous aspects of explosive ordnance disposal. Coleman, Foster, and Martinez met in the library's main reading room to compare their findings, speaking in whispers despite the fact that they were the only people in the building. "So what are we saying here?" Foster asked, looking at the assembled evidence on their laptops. "That Jordan is some kind of deep cover operative? That she faked her death and assumed a new identity?" Martinez nodded slowly. "The technical evidence supports it. Her skills match specialized training that isn't available to regular EOD personnel." And the Phoenix Protocol documentation suggests there's an official program for exactly this kind of identity transition. Coleman studied the photograph of Angela Morrison one more time. The question is why? If she's as skilled as we think she is, why would she be assigned to basic training? What's the point of hiding advanced capabilities in a program designed for beginners? The question hung in the air without an answer, but all three investigators were beginning to realize that their curiosity had led them into territory that might be dangerous to explore further. If Andrea Jordan was indeed operating under classified identity protocols, their investigation could be viewed as a security breach with serious consequences. As they prepared to leave the library, Foster voiced the concern that all three were beginning to feel. We need to be very careful about what we do with this information. If we're right about Jordan, then there are people with very high security clearances who arranged for her to be here. People who might not appreciate unauthorized investigations into classified operations. Coleman looked back at his laptop screen, where Angela Morrison's photograph seemed to stare back at him with familiar green eyes. Tomorrow we watch Jordan more carefully. We look for confirmation of what we think we know, but we need to be subtle about it. Martinez nodded agreement. And we need to consider the possibility that we're not the only ones who've noticed Jordan's unusual capabilities. If we've figured this out, others might have too. As the three specialists left the library and returned to their barracks, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the communications building. Staff Sergeant Harrison had been monitoring computer access logs as part of routine security procedures, and the unusual late-night research activity had caught his attention. Now, as he watched Coleman, Foster, and Martinez separate and head to their respective quarters, Harrison pulled out his secure phone and began composing a message that would reach people whose job it was to ensure that classified operations remained classified. Andrea Jordan's carefully constructed cover was about to face its most serious test yet. The equipment storage facility at Fort Braxton hummed with the quiet efficiency of climate-controlled systems maintaining precise temperature and humidity levels for sensitive ordnance. At 2,130 hours, the facility was officially closed, secured by electronic locks and monitored by cameras that recorded every movement within the storage areas. But Staff Sergeant Harrison's master access codes could override most security protocols when necessary, and tonight he had determined that necessity existed. Andrea Jordan found the message slipped under her barracks door when she returned from evening chow. Equipment inspection required. Storage facility C, 2,130 hours. Come alone. The note was unsigned, but the official letterhead and precise timing suggested it came from someone with authority to make such requests. Jordan approached the facility with the same measured pace that characterized her every action. But her awareness was heightened in ways that wouldn't be apparent to casual observers. 3 weeks of training had convinced her that her carefully constructed cover was holding, but the sudden late-night meeting suggested that someone had begun asking uncomfortable questions. The storage facility's main door stood slightly ajar, revealing dim emergency lighting within. Jordan entered cautiously, her training automatically cataloging exit routes, potential weapons, and defensive positions. The interior was lined with reinforced storage units containing everything from basic blasting caps to sophisticated demolition charges, all secured behind multiple layers of physical and electronic protection. Close the door behind you, Jordan. Harrison's voice came from somewhere deeper in the facility, echoing slightly off the concrete walls. We need to have a conversation that requires complete privacy. Jordan sealed the entrance and moved toward the voice, finding Harrison standing beside a workstation equipped with computers and testing equipment used for ordnance analysis. His expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested tension that hadn't been present during normal training. Interactions. Sergeant, Jordan said simply, stopping at regulation distance and maintaining the same calm demeanor that had become her trademark. Harrison studied her for a long moment before speaking. 12 hours ago, I received alerts indicating unusual computer access patterns from 3 different terminals in the base library. Extended searches through personnel databases, medical records, and training archives. All conducted by members of your training team. Jordan's expression didn't change, but Harrison caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she understood the implications. Coleman, Foster, and Martinez, Harrison continued, spent most of last night trying to figure out who you really are. They've uncovered some interesting inconsistencies in your background. He paused, watching for her reaction. They've also found some information they probably shouldn't have access to. What kind of information? Jordan's voice remained steady, but Harrison detected the careful neutrality of someone assessing potential threats. Harrison activated the workstation's monitor, which displayed a series of database search results and document fragments. Medical records indicating treatment for blast injuries sustained during classified operations. Training certifications for specialized ordnance disposal techniques not taught in standard EOD programs. And most concerning, a strong resemblance to Staff Sergeant Angela Morrison, who was officially killed in action 3 years ago. The name hit Jordan like a physical blow, though her expression remained perfectly controlled. Harrison noticed the infinitesimal pause before she responded, the kind of micro-reaction that confirmed suspicions rather than dispelling them. I'm not sure what you're implying, Sergeant, Jordan said carefully. I'm not implying anything, Harrison replied. I'm stating facts. Angela Morrison was one of the most skilled EOD specialists in the Army before she died during classified operations in Afghanistan. The casualty report was heavily redacted, but what wasn't classified indicated she was working on advanced chemical weapons disposal when her position was overrun. Harrison moved to another terminal and brought up additional documents. The interesting thing about Morrison's death is that no body was recovered. Official explanation was that hostile action and operational security prevented recovery efforts. But there are other possibilities. Jordan remained silent, but Harrison could see her calculating, weighing options, assessing risks, determining how much he actually knew versus how much he was guessing. 3 weeks ago, Harrison continued, you arrived at Fort Braxton with a background so thin it wouldn't fool a competent investigator for more than a few days. But you also demonstrated capabilities that exactly matched the specialized training Angela Morrison received before her deployment to Afghanistan. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, and Jordan realized that continued denial would only confirm Harrison's suspicions. She had been trained for situations like this, moments when operational security required difficult decisions about how much truth to reveal. What do you want from me, Sergeant? She asked finally. Harrison's expression softened slightly. I want to understand why someone with advanced combat EOD experience is pretending to be a basic trainee. I want to know whether the 3 specialists who've been investigating you are going to become security problems. And I want to know what mission you're really here to accomplish. Jordan was quiet for nearly a minute, weighing operational security against the reality that her cover was already compromised. Finally she spoke, her voice carrying a different quality, less the careful neutrality of a trainee and more the confidence of an experienced operator. Angela Morrison died in Afghanistan, she said simply. What survived was given a different name and a different mission. The confirmation hit Harrison with the force of absolute certainty. He'd suspected, but hearing it directly was still shocking. Jesus Christ, you're really her. I'm Andrea Jordan, she replied firmly. Angela Morrison is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. There's a gravestone, a memorial service, and official casualty reports that say she died serving her country. That version of events serves important purposes that go beyond one person's identity. Harrison struggled to process the implications. But why? Why fake your death and then assign you to basic training? What's the point of hiding your capabilities? Jordan, moved to the workstation and began examining the search results that Coleman and his team had uncovered. Because sometimes the most dangerous missions require people who officially don't exist. People who can operate without diplomatic complications or official acknowledgement. She pointed to one of the documents Harrison had displayed. The Phoenix Protocol isn't just about identity transition. It's about maintaining operational assets who can be deployed for missions that require complete deniability. If something goes wrong, there's no official personnel to rescue or disavow. Harrison felt a chill as he understood the full scope of what he was seeing. You're not here for training, you're here for a mission. The training provides cover, Jordan confirmed. A legitimate reason for me to be on base, access to equipment and facilities, and an explanation for why I'm developing relationships with EOD specialists who might be useful for future operations. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the facility's main door opening. Harrison and Jordan turned to see three figures entering the storage area, a Coleman, Foster, and Martinez, moving with the careful precision of people who knew. They were breaking rules, but had decided the risk was worth it. Well, Coleman said as he spotted Harrison and Jordan at the workstation. Looks like we're not the only ones interested in midnight conversations about our mysterious teammate. Foster and Martinez flanked Coleman as they approached, their expressions mixing curiosity with apprehension. They'd come seeking answers, but finding Harrison already confronting Jordan suggested the situation was more complex than they'd anticipated. "Gentleman Martinez," Harrison said formally, "you're in a restricted area after hours without authorization. That's a disciplinary offense that could result in formal charges." "With respect, Sergeant," Foster replied, "we've uncovered evidence that suggests one of our teammates is operating under false identity. That seems like a security concern that outweighs minor procedural violations." Jordan studied the three investigators with professional interest. Their initiative was impressive, their analytical skills considerable, and their persistence suggested the kind of qualities that might be useful in specialized operations. But they were also now privy to information that could compromise missions they knew nothing about. "You found what you were looking for," she said simply. "The question is what you're going to do with it." Coleman stepped forward, his earlier confidence tempered by the realization that he'd uncovered something far more significant than a simple training fraud. "We want answers. We want to know who you really are and why you're here." "My name is Andrea Jordan," she replied with the same measured calm that had characterized her response to every challenge since arriving at Fort Braxton. "Everything else is classified above your current security clearance." Martinez spoke for the first time since entering the facility. "The Phoenix Protocol documentation we found suggests you're part of a program for personnel who need new identities while maintaining operational capabilities. Are we talking about witness protection for military specialists?" Jordan's slight smile suggested that Martinez's assessment was both accurate and incomplete. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones that enemies believe are no longer available. The implications hung in the air as all five personnel contemplated the complexity of what they'd stumbled into. Coleman's investigation had revealed far more than he'd bargained for, and now all of them were involved in a situation that extended well beyond the scope of routine training operations. Harrison broke the silence with a question that carried the weight of serious consequences. "The mission you're here for, does it involve the people in this room?" Jordan's answer was delivered with the kind of precision that suggested extensive consideration of exactly this scenario. "That depends on whether the people in this room can be trusted with information that could get them killed if it falls into the wrong hands." Foster looked around the group, realizing that their curiosity had led them into territory where ignorance might have been safer than knowledge. "What kind of mission requires that level of operational security?" "The kind," Jordan replied quietly, "where failure means thousands of civilian casualties and success requires capabilities that officially don't exist." As the five EOD specialists stood in this secure storage facility, surrounded by enough explosive ordnance to level several city blocks. They realized that their training exercises had been preparation for something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Andrea Jordan's true mission was about to be revealed, and none of them were prepared for the reality of what that mission would demand. The secure briefing room beneath Fort Braxton's administration building had been activated for the first time in 8 months. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the base commander, sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by classified materials that carried security markings most personnel would never see. At 0630 hours, 12 hours after the confrontation in the storage facility, the situation had escalated beyond what could be handled at the unit level. Andrea Jordan, or Angela Morrison, as the classified files now confirmed, sat across from Colonel Hendricks with the composed demeanor of someone accustomed to high-level security briefings. Beside her, Staff Sergeant Harrison looked distinctly uncomfortable with finding himself in a room where conversations could affect national security policy. Coleman, Foster, and Martinez occupied chairs along the side wall, their expressions mixing apprehension with fascination. Their unauthorized investigation had uncovered secrets that were now being officially acknowledged, but the consequences of that knowledge remained unclear. "Before we begin," Colonel Hendricks announced, "everyone in this room will sign comprehensive, non-disclosure agreements with classification levels that extend beyond your current security clearances. The information you're about to receive is compartmentalized at the highest levels of government. Unauthorized disclosure carries penalties up to and including life imprisonment." The gravity of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Coleman exchanged glances with Foster and Martinez, realizing that their curiosity had led them into a situation where ignorance would have been far safer than knowledge. Colonel Hendricks activated a wall display that showed satellite imagery of a Middle Eastern urban area. 6 months ago, intelligence agencies identified a terrorist cell operating in Syria that had acquired components for manufacturing chemical weapons. Standard diplomatic and military responses were deemed inadequate due to the political complexities of the region. The satellite images zoomed in to show specific buildings within a crowded city district. The terrorist organization is led by Dr. Rashid al-Mansouri, a former Iraqi chemical weapons specialist who disappeared after the fall of Baghdad. Intelligence suggests he's attempting to develop enhanced nerve agents using precursor chemicals obtained through black market networks. Foster leaned forward in his chair, his medical background helping him understand the implications. Enhanced nerve agents, we're talking about weapons that could kill thousands of people with relatively small quantities. Tens of thousands. Colonel Hendricks corrected grimly. Dr. al-Mansouri's previous work involved developing persistent chemical agents that remain lethal for extended periods. If successfully deployed in urban areas, a single attack could render entire city districts uninhabitable. Harrison studied the satellite imagery with growing understanding. And conventional military responses would be complicated by civilian populations and international politics. Exactly, the colonel confirmed. Any official military action in that region would require extensive diplomatic coordination, create international incidents, and give Dr. al-Mansouri time to relocate his operation or accelerate his timeline. Jordan spoke for the first time since entering the briefing room, her voice carrying the professional tone of someone familiar with discussing classified operations. Which is why this mission requires someone who officially doesn't exist. Someone who can enter the region, locate the chemical weapons facility, and neutralize the threat without creating diplomatic complications. Coleman stared at Jordan with dawning comprehension. "You're going to Syria, alone." "Not alone," Jordan replied. "The mission requires a small team of specialists capable of handling sophisticated chemical weapons disposal under combat conditions. The kind of specialists who might be recruited from an elite EOD training program." The implications hit the room like a physical force. Martinez was the first to voice what everyone was beginning to understand. You've been evaluating us. The training exercises, the team assignments, you've been assessing our capabilities for this mission. Colonel Hendricks nodded. The Phoenix Protocol serves multiple purposes. It provides deep cover identities for experienced operatives, but it also creates opportunities to identify and recruit additional personnel for classified missions. She activated another display showing detailed dossiers on each of the specialists. Over the past 3 weeks, your performance has been monitored and evaluated not just for standard EOD competencies, but for psychological profiles, stress responses, and adaptability to unconventional scenarios. Foster looked at his own dossier with fascination and concern. What kind of psychological profiles? Ability to work under extreme pressure, Jordan answered. Willingness to operate outside standard protocols when necessary. Capacity to maintain operational security under circumstances where capture or compromise could have international consequences. Harrison reviewed the mission parameters displayed on the wall screens. How many people are we talking about for this operation? 4, Colonel Hendricks replied. 1 experienced operative, she gestured toward Jordan, and 3 specialists. Selected from the Fort Braxton training program, based on their demonstrated capabilities and psychological assessments. Coleman felt a mixture of excitement and terror as he realized what was being proposed. You're asking us to volunteer for a classified mission that officially doesn't exist, working with someone who officially died 3 years ago, to prevent a chemical weapons attack that could kill thousands of people. We're not asking, the colonel said firmly. We're informing you that you've been selected based on merit and capability. The mission parameters require volunteers, but the selection process has already been completed. Martinez studied the satellite imagery showing the target area in Syria. What exactly would our role be in this operation? Jordan answered with the precise technical knowledge that had impressed her teammates during training. Dr. Al-Mansouri's facility includes sophisticated security systems and chemical weapons storage that require specialized disposal techniques. The mission involves infiltrating the facility, documenting the weapons development program, and ensuring complete destruction of all chemical agents and production equipment. Under combat conditions, Harrison added, understanding the full scope of what was being described. The facility is located in a contested urban area, Colonel Hendricks confirmed. Intelligence suggests minimal security, but the political situation means that any prolonged operation could attract hostile forces from multiple factions. Foster raised the question that all of them were considering. What happens if we're captured? If this mission is officially non-existent, there's no diplomatic protection or rescue protocol. Jordan's answer carried the weight of someone who had operated under such conditions before. If we're captured, we don't exist. Our families receive notification that we died during training accidents. The mission continues to be classified, and any international incidents are handled through channels that maintain complete deniability. The sobering reality of covert operations settled over the room. These weren't training exercises with safety protocols and backup systems. This was the kind of mission where mistakes had permanent consequences and success required accepting risks that went far beyond normal military service. Coleman looked around the room at his teammates, seeing his own mixture of fear and determination reflected in their faces. When would this mission take place? Insertion is scheduled for 72 hours from now, Colonel Hendricks announced. Intelligence suggests Dr. Al-Mansouri is approaching completion of his weapons development program. Delaying the mission beyond this window could mean the difference between preventing an attack and responding to a chemical weapons disaster. Martinez absorbed the compressed timeline with growing apprehension. 72 hours to prepare for a mission that requires capabilities we've been training. For 3 weeks? You've been training for this specific mission since you arrived at Fort Braxton, Jordan corrected. Every exercise, every scenario, every technical challenge has been designed to prepare you for the operational requirements you'll face in Syria. Harrison realized that Jordan's seemingly excessive thoroughness during training exercises now made perfect sense. Your slow, methodical approach, you were demonstrating the precision required for chemical weapons disposal under combat conditions. Chemical weapons don't forgive mistakes, Jordan confirmed. The substances Dr. Al-Mansouri is developing remain lethal in concentrations measured in parts per billion. A single error in handling or disposal procedures could kill everyone within a several-block radius. Foster's medical knowledge helped him appreciate the technical challenges they would face. We're talking about nerve agents that can be absorbed through skin contact, inhaled in microscopic quantities, or dispersed through water supplies. The margin for error is essentially zero. Which is why this mission requires specialists with both technical expertise and the psychological capacity to work with absolute precision under extreme pressure, Colonel Hendricks said. The psychological assessments conducted during your training indicated that each of you possesses these capabilities. Coleman studied the mission timeline displayed on the wall screen. What kind of support will we have once we're in Syria? Minimal, Jordan replied honestly. Insertion and extraction will be provided by assets that maintain plausible deniability. Intelligence support will be limited to information that can't be traced to official sources. Medical support, backup personnel, and rescue operations are not available. The stark reality of operating without a safety net was sobering, but Martinez recognized that such conditions were necessary for maintaining the operational security that made the mission possible. If we succeed, what happens to the evidence of the chemical weapons program? Complete destruction, Colonel Hendricks answered. The facility, all equipment, all documentation, and all chemical agents must be eliminated in a way that appears to be an accident rather than a deliberate operation. Harrison understood the implications. An explosion that destroys everything while leaving no evidence of outside intervention. Exactly, Jordan confirmed. The world needs to believe that Dr. Al-Mansouri's operation failed due to his own incompetence, rather than being stopped by outside forces. That maintains the political stability necessary to prevent escalation in the region. As the briefing continued with detailed technical specifications and operational parameters, the four specialists began to understand that their 3 weeks of training had been preparation for one of the most dangerous and consequential missions in current anti-terrorism operations. Andrea Jordan's slow reflexes and methodical approach, which had initially seemed like liabilities, were revealed as exactly the qualities needed for handling chemical weapons that could kill thousands if mishandled by even microseconds. The woman they had underestimated was about to lead them into a mission where her careful precision might be the only thing standing between a terrorist organization and the capacity to conduct chemical weapons attacks on civilian populations. Their training was over. The real test was about to begin. The C-130 transport aircraft flew through Syrian airspace at 28,000 feet. Its navigation lights dark and transponder silent as it followed a flight path that existed only in classified databases. The cargo bay held 4 figures in civilian clothing, their military bearing disguised but not entirely concealed by the loose-fitting garments typical of international aid workers. Andrea Jordan sat across from Coleman, Foster, and Martinez, reviewing digital tablets that displayed building schematics, chemical compound specifications, and extraction routes that had been memorized and rememorized during the 72 hours since their mission briefing. The pavement difficulty. Tablets would be destroyed before insertion, leaving no physical evidence of the operation's planning or objectives. The past 3 days had transformed the 4 specialists from trainees into a covert operations team. The compressed preparation schedule had included advanced chemical weapons training, urban combat scenarios, and psychological conditioning designed to prepare them for operating in hostile Territory without backup or official support. Coleman checked his equipment one final time, running through procedures that had become automatic through endless repetition. His gear included detection equipment, sophisticated enough to identify chemical weapons components at molecular levels, disguised as standard electronics repair tools that would pass casual inspection. Foster's medical supplies were concealed within a legitimate aid worker's kit, but included antidotes and treatment protocols for chemical exposure that weren't available to conventional medical personnel. His role extended beyond team medic to include forensic analysis of any chemical weapons they might encounter. Martinez carried communications equipment and demolition supplies hidden within surveying instruments and construction materials. Her technical expertise would be crucial for documenting the weapons facility and ensuring its complete destruction. Once their mission was complete, the aircraft began its descent toward the drop zone, a remote area 40 kilometers from their target city. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets with the crisp professionalism of someone accustomed to delivering personnel who officially didn't exist to locations that weren't supposed to be accessible. 10 minutes to drop zone. Weather conditions are optimal. No hostile activity detected in the immediate area. Local time is 0347 hours, which should provide maximum concealment for your approach to the urban area. Jordan activated her tablet one final time, reviewing the mission parameters that would guide their actions over the next 18 hours. Dr. Al-Mansuri's chemical weapons facility was located in a 3-story building that appeared to be in an abandoned textile factory. Intelligence indicated the basement level had been converted into a sophisticated laboratory capable of producing enhanced nerve agents in quantities sufficient for multiple large-scale attacks. The building's location, in a contested district of the city, provided both advantages and complications. Minimal government presence meant reduced risk of official interference, but multiple armed factions operating in the area created unpredictable security challenges. 5 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced. Insertion point coordinates confirmed. Extraction window opens in 16 hours at predetermined location. The team performed final equipment checks with the practiced efficiency of specialists who understood that forgotten details could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Each piece of equipment had been selected for dual functionality tools that could serve legitimate cover purposes while providing the technical capabilities necessary for chemical weapons disposal. Jordan's gear included detection equipment so sensitive it could identify nerve agent precursors and concentrations measured in parts per trillion, disguised as water quality testing apparatus appropriate for international aid work. Her expertise with chemical weapons disposal would be crucial for safely handling substances that remained lethal long after being weaponized. The aircraft's cargo bay filled with red light as the pilot prepared for equipment deployment. The team would insert using a high-altitude, low-opening parachute technique that would place them precisely at coordinates chosen to minimize detection while providing optimal approach routes to their target. 2 minutes to drop zone. Final systems check indicates all equipment operational. Weather conditions remain favorable. No changes to extraction parameters. Coleman felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and controlled fear that preceded high-stakes operations. 3 weeks ago, he'd been skeptical of Jordan's methodical approach to explosive ordnance disposal. Now, her careful precision represented their best hope for surviving a mission that would require handling chemical weapons under combat conditions. Foster reviewed medical protocols for chemical exposure one final time, knowing that in the confined space of an underground laboratory, even microscopic contamination could be fatal. The nerve agents Dr. Al-Mansuri was developing were designed to be persistent and penetrating, capable of causing death through skin contact or inhalation of trace amounts. Martinez checked her demolition equipment, calculating blast patterns. and structural requirements for destroying the facility completely while making the destruction appear accidental. The explosion needed to be powerful enough to eliminate all evidence of chemical weapons development, but contained enough to avoid drawing international attention to the incident. 1 minute to drop zone. Stand by for insertion. The team moved to the aircraft's rear cargo door, where specialized equipment would deploy them into Syrian airspace with precision that military technology made possible, but diplomatic considerations made necessary. Their insertion would leave no radar signature, no flight records, and no evidence that foreign personnel had entered the country. Jordan took point position, her experience with covert operations evident in the calm efficiency with which she prepared for deployment. The other 3 specialists followed her lead, trusting expertise that had been proven during weeks of training designed specifically for this mission. The cargo bay door opened to reveal darkness broken only by scattered lights from the city they would soon infiltrate. The target area lay 40 kilometers away, accessible through routes that intelligence assets had identified as minimally patrolled during pre-dawn hours. Green light for deployment, the pilot announced. Good luck, and remember, you were never here. Jordan stepped into the darkness without hesitation, followed immediately by Coleman, Foster, and Martinez. The aircraft continued on its original flight path, maintaining a trajectory that would support its cover as a routine cargo flight carrying humanitarian supplies to refugee assistance programs. The 4 specialists descended through Syrian airspace. Information. Their parachutes designed to minimize radar signature while providing precise control over landing coordinates. The ground rushed up to meet them with the silent inevitability of gravity and mission requirements. They landed in a rocky valley that provided natural concealment, quickly gathering their parachutes and burying them in pre-selected locations that would be nearly impossible to discover without precise coordinates. Within 15 minutes of touchdown, all evidence of their insertion had been eliminated. The approach to the city required 3 hours of careful movement through terrain that provided concealment while avoiding areas known to be patrolled by various armed factions. Intelligence briefings had identified safe routes, but the volatile nature of the regional conflict meant that tactical situations could change rapidly. Jordan led the team with the same measured pace that had characterized her training performance. But now her deliberate movement served operational security rather than thoroughness. Each step was calculated to minimize noise, avoid observation, and maintain formation integrity during the approach to their target. As dawn approached, the team reached the outskirts of the city, where their aid worker cover would provide legitimate explanation for their presence. The building housing Dr. Al-Mansuri's chemical weapons facility was located in a district that had been largely abandoned by civilian population, but remained strategically valuable to multiple armed groups. Coleman surveyed the urban landscape through binoculars, identifying potential approach routes and security challenges that would affect their mission timeline. The target building stood 3 stories high, its windows boarded and exterior walls marked by bullet impacts that indicated recent combat activity in the area. Foster established a concealed observation position that provided visual coverage of the building's main entrance while remaining hidden from casual observation. His medical equipment included detection capabilities that would provide early warning of chemical contamination if Dr. Al-Mansuri's laboratory had experienced accidental releases. Martinez began electronic surveillance of the area, using equipment disguised as construction surveying tools to map security systems, communication networks, and structural details that would be crucial for planning their infiltration and subsequent destruction of the facility. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned district as the 4 specialists prepared to begin the most dangerous phase of their mission. Inside the building before them, Dr. Al-Mansuri was developing chemical weapons capable of killing thousands of civilians. In 18 hours, intelligence indicated he would be ready to begin distribution of his enhanced nerve agents to terrorist networks operating throughout the region. Jordan's slow reflexes and methodical approach, which had seemed like training liabilities just days before, were about to be tested against chemical weapons that allowed no margin for error. The woman her teammates had underestimated was now their only hope for preventing a chemical weapons attack that could change the nature of international terrorism forever. The real mission was beginning, and success would require precision measured in microseconds applied to substances that could kill in concentrations smaller than a grain of sand. The basement laboratory beneath the abandoned textile factory reeked of chemicals that made. Foster's detection equipment screamed silent warnings through vibrations against his wrist. Dr. Al-Mansouri had transformed the underground space into a sophisticated production facility, complete with fume hoods, precision mixing equipment, and storage tanks that contained enough precursor chemicals to manufacture nerve agents capable of killing half the population of Damascus. Jordan moved through the laboratory with the same deliberate precision that had defined her every action since Fort Braxton, but now her methodical approach served a deadlier purpose. Each step was calculated to avoid contamination from chemical residues that could penetrate skin and cause convulsions within minutes. Her detection equipment registered trace amounts of compounds that existed nowhere in nature-enhanced nerve agents designed to be more persistent, more penetrating, and more lethal than anything previously developed. Coleman worked at a computer terminal, downloading files that documented 3 years of chemical weapons research. The data revealed Dr. Al-Mansouri's true ambition: not just creating weapons for terrorist attacks, but developing a new generation of chemical agents that could render entire urban areas uninhabitable for decades. His enhanced formulations included compounds that bonded with concrete and steel, creating contamination that would persist long after initial exposure. Martinez placed demolition charges with scientific precision, calculating blast patterns that would ensure complete destruction of the facility while creating debris patterns consistent with an accidental explosion. The charges needed to generate temperatures high enough to break down complex chemical compounds at the molecular level, preventing any possibility of recovery or analysis by hostile forces. Foster monitored air quality and chemical contamination levels throughout the basement, his medical equipment providing real-time analysis of trace compounds that could indicate exposure to substances that would kill them hours later. His readings showed dangerously elevated levels of organic phosphates, the building blocks of nerve agents that Al-Mansouri had been synthesizing in quantities that suggested imminent, large-scale production. The mission timeline allowed 47 minutes for documentation and demolition preparation. Intelligence indicated that Al-Mansouri typically arrived at the facility around 0800 hours, giving them a narrow window to complete their work and escape before his security team discovered the infiltration. Jordan's examination of the storage tanks revealed the true scope of Al-Mansouri's operation. The precursor chemicals were stored in quantities that indicated production capacity for hundreds of chemical weapons, each capable of contaminating several city blocks. Worse, the mixing ratios documented in his research files showed that he had solved stability problems that had previously limited the shelf life of enhanced nerve agents. "We've got a problem," Coleman announced from the computer terminal, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "The production timeline shows Al-Mansouri isn't just developing these weapons, he's already manufactured initial batches. The files indicate 12 completed devices have been distributed to cells in major European cities." The revelation transformed their mission from prevention to damage control. Even if they destroyed the facility completely, Al-Mansouri had already succeeded in distributing weapons that could kill thousands of civilians in coordinated attacks across Europe. Martinez paused in her demolition work to process the implications. "Do the files indicate target locations or timing for the attacks?" "Partial information," Coleman replied. his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard as he copied critical data. Target cities include London, Paris, Berlin, and Rome. Attack timing is coordinated for maximum psychological impact, but the specific date isn't in these files. Foster's contamination readings spiked suddenly, indicating chemical release somewhere in the facility. His equipment identified trace amounts of VX variant compounds in the air concentrations that were sublethal, but suggested that somewhere in the building, enhanced nerve agents were being actively handled. "We're not alone," Jordan said quietly, her voice carrying the calm precision of someone accustomed to operating under extreme pressure. "Al-Mansouri is here early, and he's working with active chemical agents." The sound of footsteps on the floor above confirmed her assessment. Multiple individuals were moving through the building, their voices speaking Arabic in tones that suggested routine rather than alarm. Al-Mansouri's early arrival was apparently scheduled, not a response to security concerns. Jordan made rapid tactical decisions based on experience gained during classified operations that had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. Coleman, finish the data download. Martinez armed the demolition charges with a 15-minute delay. Foster, prepare chemical neutralization protocols in case we encounter active weapons. The team worked with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated by weeks of training that had prepared them for operating under pressure, while handling substances that allowed no margin for error. Above them, the footsteps continued, accompanied by the sound of equipment being moved and voices discussing technical details in Arabic. Foster's detection equipment registered increasing concentrations of chemical compounds, suggesting that Al-Mansouri was conducting final preparations for weapon deployment. The timing was catastrophically perfect. They had arrived during the final stages of a production cycle that would complete the terrorists' 3-year chemical weapons program. Martinez finished arming the demolition charges, setting timers that would ensure complete destruction of the facility while providing enough delay for the team to reach minimum safe distance. The explosives were positioned to create blast patterns that would appear accidental while generating temperatures sufficient to break down complex chemical compounds. Coleman completed the data download, copying files that would provide intelligence agencies with detailed information about Al-Mansouri's distribution network and target selection. The information might be crucial for preventing attacks in European cities, assuming they survived to deliver it. The sound of footsteps on basement stairs indicated that Al-Mansouri's team was descending to the laboratory level. Jordan calculated rapidly, assessing tactical options that balanced mission completion against survival probability. The demolition charges were armed, the critical data was downloaded, but their extraction route was about to be compromised. "Emergency extraction protocol," Jordan announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone trained to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure. "Alternate exit through the building's utility tunnel system. Move quickly but maintain contamination protocols." The team began moving toward a maintenance access that Martinez had identified during their initial infiltration. Foster's detection equipment continued registering dangerous levels of chemical contamination, indicating that even minor exposure to surfaces or air in certain areas could prove fatal within hours. As they reached the utility access, the basement laboratory erupted in shouts of alarm. Al-Mansouri's team had discovered evidence of the infiltration disturbed equipment, missing computer files, and demolition charges that were too sophisticated to mistake for anything other than professional sabotage. The pursuit began immediately, with multiple armed individuals searching the basement level while others moved to secure the building's exits. Jordan's team found themselves trapped between heavily armed terrorists and chemical contamination that could kill them as efficiently as bullets. The utility tunnel system provided concealment but limited mobility. The narrow passages were designed for maintenance access, not tactical movement. forcing the team to move in single file through spaces that amplified every sound and limited their ability to return fire if discovered. Foster's equipment registered lethal concentrations of chemical compounds in some tunnel sections, requiring detours that consumed precious time while Al-Mansour's security team systematically searched the building. The terrorists' knowledge of the facility gave them significant advantages in tracking intruders through the underground passages. Jordan led the team through the tunnel system with the same measured precision that had characterized her every action, but now her careful movement served immediate survival rather than methodical thoroughness. Each decision point required rapid assessment of chemical contamination levels, structural integrity, and tactical positioning. The sound of footsteps above indicated that the search was expanding to the building's upper levels, with Al-Mansour's team methodically clearing each room and corridor. The terrorists' disciplined approach suggested military training and experience with security procedures that would make escape increasingly difficult. Martinez monitored the demolition timer through a concealed display, watching minutes count down toward detonation that would destroy the facility, but also eliminate their primary extraction route. The blast would consume the entire building, creating a collapse pattern that would prevent any possibility of survival for personnel still inside. Coleman secured the downloaded intelligence data in a device designed to survive explosions, chemical exposure, and electromagnetic interference. The information about Al-Mansour's European distribution network was too valuable to risk losing, even if extraction seemed increasingly unlikely. The team reached a junction in the tunnel system where maintenance passages intersected with the building's original foundation structure. Foster's detection equipment showed lower contamination levels in this area, but the sound of approaching footsteps indicated that Al-Mansour's team had discovered their route. Jordan assessed their tactical situation with the cold precision of someone trained to operate in circumstances where conventional military doctrine provided no guidance. They were trapped underground with armed terrorists above them, chemical contamination around them, and demolition charges counting down toward detonation. "Contact imminent," she announced quietly. "Maintain chemical protection protocols regardless of tactical requirements. Exposure to active nerve agents is non-survivable, even if we neutralize immediate threats." The first terrorist appeared at the tunnel entrance, his automatic weapon trained on the narrow passage where Jordan's team was positioned. His tactical gear included chemical protection equipment, indicating that Al-Mansour's security personnel were trained to operate in contaminated environments. The firefight began in confined spaces where ricochet patterns and chemical contamination created deadly complications beyond normal combat considerations. Foster maintained contamination monitoring while engaging targets, his medical knowledge helping him assess exposure risks that could prove fatal hours after apparent survival. Martinez used shaped charges to collapse tunnel sections, creating barriers that provided temporary protection, while channeling the fight toward areas where chemical contamination was lowest. Her demolition expertise proved crucial for managing tactical positioning in an environment where every surface might be lethal. Coleman's data security training included combat protocols, allowing him to engage targets while protecting intelligence that could prevent terrorist attacks in multiple European cities. The downloaded files were worth fighting for, even under circumstances that conventional military doctrine would consider unsurvivable. The firefight continued through tunnel sections where chemical contamination required constant awareness of exposure levels, tactical positioning, and time constraints imposed by demolition charges that would detonate regardless of personnel location. Jordan fought with the same methodical precision that had characterized her training performance, but now her deliberate movement served immediate survival against opponents who knew the facility's layout and had superior numbers. Her experience with classified operations provided tactical knowledge that kept the team alive through encounters that would have been fatal for conventional EID specialists. The sound of the building's structure beginning to shift indicated that the demolition charges had created preliminary damage, weakening supports and compromising structural integrity. The facility was beginning its collapse sequence, creating time pressure that would determine whether anyone survived the next few minutes. Foster's contamination readings spiked to lethal levels as damaged chemical storage began leaking enhanced nerve agents into the air circulation system. His medical equipment indicated exposure, concentrations that would cause death within minutes for anyone without adequate protection. The team's chemical protection gear was designed for limited exposure during controlled conditions, not extended combat in environments where every breath might contain lethal concentrations of enhanced nerve agents. Their survival time was measured in minutes, not hours. Martinez detonated additional charges to create an escape route through the building's foundation, using controlled explosions to open passages while avoiding structural collapse that would trap them underground. Her calculations balanced immediate survival against the need to prevent chemical contamination from reaching ground level. The tunnel system began filling with smoke and chemical vapors as the building's destruction accelerated. Beyond the original demolition timeline, Al-Mansouri's security team retreated toward exits, leaving Jordan's team trapped in underground passages that were becoming uninhabitable. Jordan made the tactical decision that would define the mission's outcome and determine whether thousands of European civilians would die in coordinated chemical weapons attacks. The intelligence data Coleman had secured was too valuable to lose, but extraction through conventional routes had become impossible. The facility's destruction was accelerating, creating a collapse sequence that would eliminate all evidence of chemical weapons development while trapping anyone still inside. The team had minutes to escape, but their route to safety required traversing areas where chemical contamination had reached lethal concentrations. Foster's medical analysis indicated that brief exposure to the contaminated areas might be survivable with immediate treatment, but extended exposure would cause death regardless of medical intervention. The team faced a choice between certain death underground and possible survival through areas that might prove equally fatal. Jordan's experience with classified operations included scenarios where survival required accepting risks that would normally be considered unacceptable. Her training had prepared her for making decisions where all options carried the possibility of death, but some choices offered marginally better survival probability. The sound of secondary explosions indicated that the demolition charges had triggered reactions in Al-Mansouri's chemical storage, creating a chain reaction that was consuming the facility faster than originally planned. The building was becoming an inferno of chemical fires and structural collapse. Coleman secured the intelligence data in protective containers designed to survive conditions that would kill human beings, ensuring that information about European terrorist networks would be recoverable, even if the team didn't survive extraction. Martinez calculated blast patterns and structural collapse timing, determining that they had approximately 3 minutes before the building's destruction became complete and irreversible. Her demolition expertise provided their only hope for identifying escape routes that might remain passable. Foster prepared emergency medical protocols for chemical exposure, knowing that their survival might depend on his ability to treat nerve agent poisoning under field conditions with limited equipment. His medical supplies included experimental antidotes that had never been tested under combat conditions. The team began their final push toward escape through tunnel sections where chemical contamination was approaching lethal concentrations and structural collapse threatened to trap them underground forever. Jordan led with the same measured precision that had defined her training performance, but now her careful movement served immediate survival in conditions that would test every aspect of their specialized training. The building above them was becoming an inferno of chemical reactions and structural collapse as Al-Mansouri's 3 years of weapons development consumed itself in a conflagration that would eliminate all evidence of terrorist chemical weapons production. Their escape route led through the heart of the destruction, where chemical contamination and structural collapse created a gauntlet that would test whether their training had truly prepared them for conditions that exceeded every simulation they had experienced. Jordan's slow reflexes were about to face their ultimate test, not in controlled training scenarios, but in real-world conditions where microseconds would determine whether they survived to prevent chemical weapons attacks that could kill thousands of European civilians. The woman her teammates had initially underestimated was now their only hope for survival, in circumstances that would test every aspect of the precision and methodical expertise that had seemed like training liabilities. Just weeks before as they entered the most dangerous phase of their escape, the building's destruction reached critical momentum, creating conditions where survival would require exactly the kind of careful precision under extreme pressure that had defined Andrea Jordan's approach to explosive ordnance disposal since her first day at Fort Braxton. But this time, the stakes weren't training scores or instructor evaluation. They were the lives of thousands of innocent civilians who would die if the intelligence data Coleman carried didn't reach the agencies that could prevent coordinated terrorist attacks. Across Europe, the sound of approaching structural collapse echoed through the tunnel system as Jordan's team began their desperate race against chemical contamination, terrorist pursuit, and building destruction that was consuming everything around them. In the narrow tunnel ahead, Foster's detection equipment registered a sudden spike in airborne nerve agent concentrations that indicated imminent lethal exposure. Behind them, the sound of pursuing terrorists grew closer, their automatic weapons echoing off tunnel walls as they closed distance on their trapped quarry. Above them, the building's destruction was reaching critical mass, creating a crescendo of chemical fires and structural collapse that would soon make escape impossible regardless of contamination levels or tactical positioning. Jordan assessed their situation with the cold precision that had characterized her approach to every challenge. Since arriving at Fort Braxton, they were trapped between lethal chemical contamination ahead, armed terrorists behind, and building collapse that would eliminate all options within minutes. It was in this moment of absolute crisis, when survival seemed impossible and mission failure would result in thousands of civilian deaths, that a training memory from Fort Braxton suddenly crystallized into a solution that had never appeared in any manual or simulation. During their 3rd week of training, Jordan had demonstrated an unusual technique for handling unstable explosive devices, a method that seemed impossibly slow but achieved results that conventional rapid response protocols couldn't match. Her teammates had dismissed it as excessive caution, but now Coleman realized it represented something far more significant. Jordan's methodical approach wasn't about being slow, it was about being absolutely precise when precision was the only thing that mattered. As if reading his thoughts, Jordan turned to face her teammates with an expression that mixed calm determination with the kind of absolute focus that had made her legendary during classified operations before her official death. "Trust me," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had survived impossible situations through methods that others couldn't understand. "Everything we've trained for leads to this moment." Foster's detection equipment screamed warnings about airborne chemical concentrations that were approaching immediately lethal levels. The tunnel ahead was becoming a death trap that would kill them within seconds of exposure, but the route behind them was blocked by terrorists whose weapons would be equally fatal. Martinez calculated structural collapse patterns, determining that they had less than 2 minutes before the tunnel system became completely impassable. Her demolition expertise indicated that the building's destruction was accelerating beyond any possibility of control or mitigation. Coleman secured the intelligence data in final protective configurations, preparing for scenarios where mission Success might require personal sacrifice to ensure that critical information about European terrorist networks survived even if the team didn't dot it, was then in a tunnel filling with lethal chemical vapors while armed terrorists closed from behind. And structural collapse threatened from above. That Jordan demonstrated why her careful precision had been developed through years of operating in conditions that would kill anyone who moved too fast or made decisions too quickly. The solution required split-second timing applied to actions that had to be executed with absolute precision, exactly the combination of speed and methodical accuracy that had defined Jordan's controversial training approach since her first day at Fort Braxton. In the crisis moment that would determine whether they lived or died, whether thousands of European civilians would be saved or killed in coordinated terrorist attacks. Andrea Jordan's slow reflexes were about to prove that sometimes the fastest way to save lives is to never hurry at all. The tunnel ahead, filled with chemical vapors that glowed faintly in their equipment lights, creating a deadly aurora that marked the boundary between survival and immediate death. Behind them, terrorist voices grew closer, their tactical coordination indicating professional training that would make conventional escape impossible. Above them, the building's structure groaned with the sound of imminent collapse, creating time pressure that would eliminate all options within seconds rather than minutes. Jordan reached into her equipment pack and withdrew something that made Coleman's eyes widen with sudden understanding. It was a standard M67 fragmentation grenade, the same type they had trained with during their final weeks at Fort Braxton, when Jordan's methodical approach to explosive device handling had seemed so inadequate for real-world requirements. Now, as chemical contamination reached lethal concentrations and structural collapse threatened to trap them underground forever, Coleman realized that Jordan's careful training with grenades hadn't been about standard tactical applications. She had been preparing for exactly this moment, when survival would require using an explosive device not as a weapon, but as a precision tool for creating exactly the right kind of structural damage to provide an escape route through conditions that would otherwise be unsurvivable. Jordan pulled the grenade's pin with the same deliberate precision that had characterized every action since Fort Braxton, but now her methodical approach served immediate survival in circumstances that conventional military doctrine couldn't address. "Cover and seal," she announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Chemical protection maximum, blast mitigation protocols, emergency medical standing by." Foster immediately understood and began preparing chemical exposure treatment while Coleman and Martinez positioned themselves for blast protection that would shield them from explosive effects while maintaining their equipment's functionality. Jordan calculated throw angles, blast patterns, and structural collapse vectors with the kind of precision that had made her teammates question her suitability for rapid response (EOD) work. But now they understood that her careful calculations weren't about being slow. They were about being absolutely accurate. When accuracy meant the difference between survival and death, the grenade left her hand with a trajectory calculated to create precisely the right kind of structural damage, not too much, which would cause complete tunnel collapse, and not too little, which would fail to create their escape route. The throw had to be perfect, accounting for chemical air density, blast reflection patterns, and structural engineering principles that would determine whether the explosion created salvation or destruction. As the grenade sailed through air thick with lethal chemical vapors, Coleman finally understood why Jordan's reflexes had seemed so slow during training. She wasn't slow, she was precise beyond anything conventional military training could achieve. The explosion came exactly when and where Jordan had calculated, creating a blast pattern that punched through the tunnel's chemical contamination, while opening a passage to an adjacent utility system that Foster's equipment indicated had lower contamination levels. The structural damage was precisely controlled, creating an escape route without triggering complete collapse that would have trapped them underground. Jordan's throw had been calculated to achieve results that required absolute precision under conditions where conventional grenade tactics would have been fatal. But the explosion also achieved something else. It dispersed the chemical contamination, enough to create a brief window where survival was possible for personnel with adequate protection and immediate medical treatment. "Move now," Jordan commanded, leading the team through the newly created passage with the same measured pace that had defined her training performance, but now served immediate survival under conditions that tested every aspect of their specialized preparation. Foster monitored chemical exposure levels as they moved, providing real-time medical assessment that would determine whether they survived the next few minutes. His equipment indicated dangerous but not immediately lethal. Concentration survivable with quick movement and proper medical treatment. Martinez used additional shaped charges to seal their passage behind them, preventing pursuit while creating structural barriers that would contain chemical contamination. Her demolition work was precisely calculated to prevent terrorist follow-up without compromising their escape route. Coleman protected the intelligence data while maintaining tactical awareness that would be crucial for their final extraction from the facility. The downloaded files contained information that could prevent terrorist attacks, but only if they survived to deliver it to agencies that could take action. The team moved through utility passages that were filling with smoke and chemical vapors as the building's destruction reached its climax. Jordan's grenade had created their escape route, but the facility's collapse was accelerating beyond any possibility of control. They reached ground level as the building behind them erupted in a series of explosions that eliminated all evidence of al-Mansouri's chemical weapons development. The terrorist leader's 3-year program was being consumed in a conflagration that would appear to be an accidental explosion rather than deliberate sabotage. Emergency medical treatment began immediately, with Foster administering experimental antidotes for chemical exposure while the team moved toward their extraction point. The chemical contamination levels they had survived would have been fatal without immediate intervention, but Foster's medical expertise provided their margin of survival. The extraction helicopter appeared precisely on schedule, its crew trained to handle personnel who had been exposed to chemical weapons during classified operations. Jordan's team was evacuated to medical facilities, where their survival could be ensured and the intelligence data could be processed. As the helicopter lifted off from Syrian territory, Coleman looked back at the burning facility that had housed one of the most dangerous chemical weapons programs in modern history. The building was being consumed completely, with temperatures high enough to break down complex chemical compounds at the molecular level. Al-Mansouri's operation was eliminated, but the intelligence data Coleman carried indicated that 12 chemical weapons devices had already been distributed to terrorist cells in European cities. The mission had prevented further production, but the immediate threat to civilian populations remained. During the flight to their debriefing location, Jordan's teammates finally understood why her slow reflexes and methodical approach had been so crucial to their survival. Every action she had taken, from her initial training performance through the grenade throw that had saved their lives, had been calculated with precision that exceeded conventional military capabilities. "How did you know?" Coleman asked as medical personnel treated their chemical exposure. "How did you know the grenade throw would create exactly the right kind of structural damage?" Jordan's answer carried the quiet authority of someone who had survived situations that would kill most people. "Because I've been training for this specific scenario for 3 years. Every exercise, every technique, every methodical approach was preparation for handling chemical weapons under combat conditions where conventional tactics would be fatal." Foster reviewed their medical treatment data, confirming that they had survived chemical exposure levels that would have killed anyone without immediate antidote administration. "Your precision saved our lives. If that grenade had detonated even 2 feet from your target point, we would have died from tunnel collapse or chemical contamination." Martinez calculated the structural engineering involved in Jordan's grenade throw, recognizing expertise that went far beyond standard military training. The blast pattern was perfect, just enough structural damage to create our escape route without triggering complete collapse. That required understanding building engineering at a level that most demolition specialists never achieve. As their helicopter approached the debriefing facility, Jordan's teammates realized that the woman they had initially underestimated possessed capabilities that had been developed through years of classified operations in conditions that would test the limits of human survival. Her slow reflexes weren't a liability. They were evidence of precision developed through experiences that required absolute accuracy under pressure that would break most people. The methodical approach that had seemed inappropriate for rapid response EAD work was actually the product of training designed for handling the most dangerous substances on Earth under combat conditions. Intelligence data they had recovered would enable agencies to prevent coordinated terrorist attacks in London, Paris, Berlin, and Rome. Al-Mansuri's chemical weapons program had been eliminated completely, with his facility destroyed and his research consumed in fires that reached temperatures capable of breaking down complex nerve agents. But the mission's success had depended entirely on Jordan's ability to execute a grenade throw with precision that exceeded anything conventional military training could achieve. Her careful aim, calculated under conditions of extreme chemical contamination and structural collapse, had created their escape route through circumstances that would have been fatal for anyone who moved too quickly or made decisions without absolute precision. As the debriefing began, Coleman, Foster, and Martinez understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a demonstration of capabilities that had been developed through classified training programs designed to handle threats that conventional military doctrine couldn't address. Andrea Jordan's slow reflexes had saved their lives and prevented chemical weapons attacks that could have killed thousands of European civilians. The woman they had laughed at for her methodical approach to training exercises had proven that sometimes the most important decisions require exactly the kind of careful precision that appears to be slowness but is actually expertise operating at levels that few people ever achieve. The grenade she caught, metaphorically speaking, through her precise throw that created their salvation, had indeed saved everyone, just as the mission title had promised. But the real revelation was that her entire approach to explosive ordnance disposal, from her first day at Fort Braxton through their escape from the Syrian chemical weapons facility, had been calibrated for handling substances in situations that demanded precision beyond conventional understanding. Jordan's slow reflexes weren't a training limitation, they were a survival capability, developed through experience with the most dangerous materials and circumstances that modern warfare could produce. Her methodical approach wasn't inappropriate for rapid response. It was the only thing that made survival possible. When working with chemical weapons that could kill in concentrations measured in molecules, the mission was complete. The threat was eliminated, and thousands of lives had been saved by a woman whose teammates had initially dismissed her capabilities based on superficial observations about her training performance. Andrea Jordan had proven that in a world where split-second decisions often led to disaster, sometimes the fastest way to save lives was to never hurry at all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.